Bruxelles,
Madrid.
Welcome back to our podcast, Tomorrow's Europe. This time in collaboration with my colleagues from our network across Europe, we're going to look at the challenges facing our societies. As you are well aware, one of the main problems we Europeans face is the return of the war to the continent, with Russia's war against Ukraine and, in our immediate vicinity, the war in the Middle East. This puts Europe in a difficult position. It must consider rearming and as a result make tough choices regarding its budget. Do we have to choose between defending our social model or defending ourselves? Europe is known for its welfare system. For years, its people have seen economic development and social protection as two sides of the same coin. The welfare state tries to reduce inequality, make sure everyone has access to essential services, and keep society stable overall. Social transfers have considerably reduced poverty rates, cutting them from around 30%, which is the level in the United States, to between 10 to 15%. But with the global uncertainty, some Europeans are questioning their social model, arguing it's too costly, prone to abuse, and a threat to economic competitiveness in an aging society. Also, since he was first elected, Donald Trump has been pushing European countries to spend more on defense in the context of NATO. Under pressure from the US president, there has been a shift from a 2% spending guideline to a much higher commitment of 5% of GDP on defense by 2035. Professor Kostas Sifantis, an expert in international relations at Pantheon University in Athens, strongly objects to this new target.
Even the United States does not spend 5% of its GDP on defense. This is essentially a ploy designed to undermine Europe politically and pave the way for the US to ramp up the old debate that Europe is not spending enough on defense.
In 2024, European countries spent between 370 and 380 billion euros on defense, according to various sources. For comparison, the US spent $968 billion US dollars, China 317 billion, and Russia 151 billion. But is the amount spent on the military enough to meet our potential needs? Professor Herbert Wulff, who is a political scientist and researcher in peace and conflict studies, has just co-authored a study on this very topic.
In this study, we asked ourselves, in the context of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, what capabilities Russia actually has, and to what extent NATO is able to defend itself. We came to the conclusion that NATO still has superiority, not only in terms of military spending, but also in terms of the number of soldiers, tanks, and major weapons systems. As such, we need to think about the nature of the threat, what constitutes it. But there is no need to panic or go into crisis mode. We have reached a sufficient level. There is no need for excessive rearmament.
GDP, or the gross domestic product, as you may know, is the total money a country makes by selling its goods and services. So 5% of all this value created by Germany's economy is a massive amount. It represents nearly half of the entire German government's yearly budget. And this, Wulff adds, does not make for a sensible security policy. Still, Europeans have understood that Trump's ambitions and threats have to be taken seriously, and his recent move on Greenland has deeply shaken the trust that Europeans once placed in their American ally. So here we are, following the global trend of increased military spending. Indeed, the amount spent on the military around the world went up by 37% between 2015 and 2024, with the 9.5% decrease in 2024 being the biggest yearly rise since 1988 at least. But public funds, much like our wallets, are never big enough. On top of that, this demand for more financing comes at a time when the European Union is actually getting poorer because of an aging population and inflation that won't go away. These put more strain on our budgets. So does this mean that Europeans are going to have to choose between guns and butter? Enak Ketusha, a Romanian professor of social and political science, is worried about this.
Many areas will be affected, particularly investment. Education will also be greatly impacted. The costs associated with these budget cuts will be passed on to each consumer.
But for Maurizio Francini, an Italian economist who teaches at the Sapienza University in Rome, the equation is not that simple.
Increasing military spending means having a budget that makes room for these expenses. This room can be made on the expenditure side by reducing other spending, on the revenue side by creating additional revenue, or even on the debt side, that is, by borrowing more. But there is no automatic mechanism. It's a question of political choices. And political choices are complicated.
One way of freeing up funds for new expenditure would be to ensure that spending is not spread too sparsely, for example, across European countries or even within them. This would enable existing funds to be used more efficiently within state budgets. Professor Wolf says that if national, regional and local public authorities all agree on the best way to spend money, it could help to reduce the public deficit and allow new priorities to be funded.
In Europa wird sehr viel Geld.
In Europe, a lot of money is wasted on what I call European small-scale nationalism, because all countries want the funds they spend to benefit companies in their own country. And so it is not the most efficient or least expensive company that is chosen. Other, completely different interests are taken into account, not security interests.
And another university professor, Georgi Shopov, a Bulgarian national welfare expert, says we need to get a bit more creative about balancing both priorities.
War or social welfare? Both. Because black and white thinking is not a good approach in politics. We need to increase military spending and modernize the EU's defense capabilities, while at the same time maintaining an adequate social protection system. It is not a question of undermining one system or the other, a question of either or, but of both, while optimizing other public expenditures.
When it comes to the welfare versus welfare debates, though, there are some voices that go against the apparent consensus among EU leaders that military spending should, within reason, be increased. This debate is a delicate one and risks causing social and political division. But important decisions like this need to be discussed out in the open. However, there is a risk that pro-Russian parties and groups could take over the discussion. Far-right parties like the Czech Freedom and Direct Democracy (SPD) and the Polish Confederation Liberty and Independence, for example, say they're peace promoters, but they're against supporting Ukraine's defense. Viktorija Chmielite-Nielsen, chair of Lithuania's opposition liberal movement and a member of the Seimas National Security and Defense Committee, says there are parties in Lithuania, even in the ruling majority, that manipulate the allocation of national defense and social welfare funding to promote their own agenda.
If the government decides to significantly increase the defense budget, it is natural that there are not enough resources for everything. Among other areas, social needs and education can be forced to take a back seat. This may accelerate the emergence of radical forces in the next political cycle that see things differently, that perhaps want to befriend all our neighbours, essentially morally surrendering to the aggressors, no longer supporting Ukraine, not increasing its defence capabilities, and so on. This is a dangerous path, and one that it is absolutely not necessary to take.
As the saying goes, si vis pacem para bellum. If you want peace, prepare for war. So, investing jointly in security and defense is both a logical and necessary step when it comes to protect our values and our way of life, says Professor Tusha in Romania.
There is, of course, a certain cost to quality of life, with such a high percentage of GDP spent on armaments. But in order to preserve what we have achieved so far, where we have managed to get, what we have developed, we must arm ourselves, because this is a means of deterrence. The bloc's combined armies provide an important counterweight.
Indeed, unity is strength. But perhaps it's not all about draining the public coffers, says Georgiana Teodorescu, a Conservative MEP from Romania. Instead, it could actually bring some socio-economic benefits, thereby helping to bolster the bloc's welfare state. She says the €800 billion Rearm Europe program is a good example, as it could create loads of new jobs in Romania.
A person employed in a local arms factory pays taxes to the state, which are then distributed to sectors such as education and health, thus creating added value.
To finish, I'd like to share some positive thoughts from Gerhard Knaus, an Austrian political scientist. He thinks Europe's future isn't as bleak as it might seem.
We are currently experiencing a very dangerous development in Europe, namely growing cultural pessimism, a feeling that everything is going in the wrong direction. International law, innovation, Europe's economic power, a sense that we are doomed to decline. This picture does not correspond to reality. If we look at the most innovative societies in the world, we see that small European states are often at the top of the list. 16 of the top 20 most highly regarded countries are European. There are currently 10 candidate countries that want to join the EU. Soon, Iceland may be added to this list. Perhaps Greenland wants to join, and perhaps Norway too. So, seen from the outside, the EU's member states and institutions are more attractive than ever before in history.
So it looks like we're going to need to make guns and butter work. But we're starting from a position of strength to achieve this. A massive thank you to Marianna and Nikos from Sky Radio in Greece, Jean-Claude, who works for Radio 100,7 in Luxembourg, Magda, who's a journalist at Radio Romagna, Julia from Radio 24 in Italy, Antoinetta from Bulgaria's national radio, Augustie at Lithuania's Žinių Radijas, Neja, who's our colleague at Austrian Radio Gora, and Wojciech from the Europeans podcast. Come back next week for a new episode of These Societal Challenges, and we're going to be discussing a big problem, which is trust, as young and less younger people are feeling more and more skeptical vis-à-vis traditional institutions in Europe. Make sure to tune in.